So design structure matrices essentially allow you to model operations, and the key thing, they allow you to essentially capture our iterations and cycles. So if you recall, we were discussing how the critical path method imposes a constraint that everything has to be in some kind of sequence, either parallel or in series, but still in a sequence. You're not allowed to have cycles. This method explicitly gives you the ability to model cycles and iterations, which are often part and parcel of projects. So this is an example of a task-based DSM. I'm going to start off with something that you've already seen and familiar with, which is the project graph. And I'm just going to show you what it means when we put it in a matrix notation. So we're capturing the same information, and that's key, right? We're not introducing any new information. We're just representing it in a different way, and in a way that allows you to capture additional things which this method didn't readily allow you to do. So here we have task A that feeds into C, task A that feeds into B, so on and so forth, right? So in a matrix representation, what we would do is essentially put X's or ones. In a computer, when we're coding it, we typically put ones to represent what is connected to what. So A feeds into B and C, B feeds into D and E, right? So B feeds into E and D. So we essentially look down the column for each element, and that gives us what that element provides to other. Okay, so an easy way to remember the directionality, or so it's of how the convention is, provides goes down, okay, and this is depends. So if you look down a column, you'll know what that element is providing to. And if you look across the row, you'll see what an element is receiving from, okay? So essentially, because if you recall, the arrows are unidirectional, so we need to be careful about directionality here. So here we can say that A provides to B and C, or it's feeding into B and C. And if we look across the row for B, we can see that B depends on A. So let's say now we wanted to introduce a cycle, and we said that once we get to task G, we go back to task C, say for example. What we would do in the matrix is put an X here, right? So G provides to C, okay? Because G is feeding an arrow into C. So so C depends on G as well. So if you look across the row for C, C depends on G, in addition to, of course, depending on A as well, right? Can anyone tell me what's sort of interesting about this diagram after I introduce the X arrow? Is there any pattern that you can spot that's special? What's special about this red X here? Yep, you want to say something, Diana?
It's right to the diagonal.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing to note, that cycles occur on the right side of the diagonal. So you can immediately spot, when you're looking at the matrix representation, whether your task arrangements or whether your graph has cycles or not. If everything is below the diagonal, so everybody knows what I mean by the diagonal? So basically this is the diagonal where the numbers are, okay? So this is the diagonal of the matrix. The numbers are just showing the task durations. You don't necessarily have to put them there, but this is one convention. And everything below these numbers correspond to X's or arrows that are all feed forward, meaning that they all go from left to right, right? And everything was in a sequence. But if you have X's on the right side of the diagonal, that means you have cycles, you have iterations. And it's a very quick way of spotting right away whether you have cycles, iterations, or whether everything is just proceeding in a feed-forward manner. This is essentially a feedback, right? This is a feedback arrow. So the elements on the right side of the diagonal give you an indication of feedback in the system, and elements on the left side of the diagonal, or it is often called the lower part of the diagonal, is an indication of feed-forward connections. So this is the lower part of the diagonal, and this is the upper part of the diagonal, all the squares on that. So those are terms that are also often used. Is there any questions?